I was halfway through washing my hands in the office bathroom when I first heard it, the strangest sound I'd ever encountered on a normal, otherwise boring Tuesday morning. Under the steady flow of water, I picked up a distant, crackling hiss, drifting through the vents. At first, I assumed it was a faulty fan or some mechanical glitch in the building's HVAC. But a moment later, I realized it was coming from the overhead speaker system, a faint noise, like radio static, only too rhythmic to be simple interference. My name is Kevin Bradbury, 46 years old, husband to a wonderful wife named Sarah, father of 2 rambunctious boys, Theo and Liam. I worked as a mid-level manager at Trident Office Solutions, 27th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The day had begun like any other, scalding coffee, rushed kisses goodbye, traffic congestion, and an early meeting about supply budgets. Nothing unusual at all. Until I stepped away to use the restroom and heard that sinister crackle filtering in from the corridor. I shut the faucet, my heart oddly racing. The building's overhead speaker occasionally played bland music or offered corporate announcements, but this didn't sound like either. It was a sputtering hush, interspersed with weird, halting hums, as though a station was out of tune or a voice was trying to form words out of static. I gave myself a mental shake, dried my hands, and pulled the bathroom door open. What greeted me in the hallway made my stomach flip. Normally, there'd be coworkers briskly walking, exchanging morning banter or heading off to the break room. Now, half a dozen staffers stood frozen in place, gazes transfixed on something invisible. They blocked the corridor like statues, each face blank, eyes half-lidded, as though lulled into an eerie half-sleep. The overhead speaker hissed that same static, growing louder the closer I got. I tried to see if anyone was responding to me. Hey Claire, hey Joseph. Are you okay? But nobody moved. They just stared straight ahead, breathing shallowly. An uneasy prickle teased the back of my neck. Then, abruptly, the static noise on the speaker changed pitch. My coworkers' heads tilted in unison, as though puppets on an invisible string. My own voice came out in a panicked squeak. Guys, this really isn't funny. No one answered. The static shifted again. This time, it resolved into a faint, raspy whisper. Emergency alert. Do not listen to the radio. Then the voice warbled back into static. For a few seconds, my mind refused to process it. Emergency alert. Do not listen to the radio. That was insane. Why an announcement telling us not to tune in? I took a shaky step forward. Instantly, a half-dozen heads snapped toward me. Each coworker stared with unnerving intensity, as though noticing me for the first time. Their eyes were glassy, mouths slightly open. My heart hammered as I forced a nervous smile, raising my hands in a half-calming gesture. Hello there, guys. Are you all right? No one spoke, instead they just stared. Then, as if responding to some silent cue, they began walking, gliding in my direction. Every instinct roared for me to run. But they were friends, or had been until something changed them. I took a cautious step backward. Look, maybe we should switch off that static, or suddenly, the overhead speaker crackled again, spitting out a new wave of droning hum. My coworkers stopped, heads cocked as though listening. Then they parted, forming a weird corridor with their bodies, leaving a path open for me. My skin crawled. Something about them wanted me to move forward. But into what? Ignoring the silent invitation, I spun on my heel and bolted the other way, back toward the restroom. I needed to find the building's main radio, or some speaker system, or anything. Because the voice had said, don't listen to the radio. And that static was no ordinary background noise. Something was controlling them through it. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall, heart pounding. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from Sarah, presumably about weekend plans or groceries. But an urgent sense told me not to answer. I had no explanation for my sudden dread, except that the broadcast might have compromised more than the building's overhead. Could the entire tower be in some sort of bizarre trance? From behind the stall door, I heard footsteps entering the restroom, too many to be a single person, then silence. Through the gap at the bottom, I glimpsed dress shoes and motionless ankles. They just stood there as if waiting. My entire body trembled. What do they want? Suddenly, the overhead static fizzled and that eerie voice resumed, this time slightly clearer. Do not listen. Radio, radio, dangerous, run. It died into static again. At that exact moment, the ankles pivoted, footsteps receding. My coworkers left, as though they were responding to some inaudible command. I exhaled, feeling shaky. Something is using the radio frequencies to hypnotize people. And it had told me not to listen. Or had it really? The voice sounded strangled, like it was fighting the static. My adrenaline soared. I had to do something, but first, I needed out of this building, away from that cursed broadcast. Clenching my jaw, I eased the stall door open. The restroom was empty now, but the overhead speaker still emitted faint hisses. As quietly as possible, I left, creeping toward the emergency stairwell. If I could reach my office, my personal desk radio was there. Ironically, I might learn more. Or maybe sabotage it. Because the building's main PA system, obviously, was under some weird infiltration. I have to warn my family, a voice in my head insisted. But the voice from the static had said, don't listen to the radio. Maybe phones were compromised too. Fear churned in my gut. This was only the start of something bigger, something deeply, horribly wrong. I managed to slip into the stairwell without encountering more colleagues. My heart hammered with each step up the flights toward the 27th floor. Midway, I heard a door open several levels above, the faint scuffle of shoes. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. The footsteps came closer, then paused. Another moment of silence, then the steps retreated upward. Possibly, they were just more entranced employees. I continued, forcing my shaky legs to climb. Reaching the 27th floor landing, I cracked the door open and peered into the corridor. My usual daily path, past the break room, greet the receptionist, then to my cubicle-laden area. But the hallway was deserted, eerily so. No chatter, no phone ringing, just a thick hush. Creeping forward, I saw the break room door ajar. Inside, the radio perched on a shelf near the fridge was turned on, hissing softly. Usually, it played local news or easy-listening music. Now, it spewed that same disturbing static. A pair of coworkers, James and Felicia, stood side by side, backs to me, facing the radio. Neither spoke or blinked, and their heads moved in small, synchronous tilts, as though responding to invisible instructions. I recalled the fleeting message I'd heard earlier. Emergency alert, don't listen to the radio. That must mean this was the source. If the overhead speaker was compromised, maybe it was relaying the same signal from this device or a connected feed. My mind reeled. If I turn it off, can I free them? Gritting my teeth, I inched into the break room. James and Felicia didn't turn. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio's volume knob, but just as my fingertips brushed it, Felicia's head snapped around. James followed suit, turning to stare at me. They moved in stiff, jerky motions, but their arms rose protectively around the radio. A soft hiss came from Felicia's mouth, or from deep in her throat. I couldn't tell. I yanked my hand back. The radio whined, spewing more static. Then, for a split second, the static parted. Enslave Earth must destroy radio. It cut out and the hiss returned. Felicia lunged, arms outstretched. I stumbled back, colliding with a table. James advanced too, eyes lifeless. They were protecting the device. I realized, with a jolt of horror, that they'd do anything to keep it broadcasting. Because something inside that frequency was controlling them, maybe controlling half the city. Felicia, I croaked, it's me, Kevin. Come on, you don't want to do this. But her face was slack, uncomprehending. She hissed again, thrusting a hand toward my throat. I ducked, heart pounding. I can't fight them both. Instead, I whipped around, grabbed the break room's rolling cart and slammed it forward. They stumbled, giving me an opening. I snatched the radio, ignoring the electric crackle surging through my palm, and bolted out the door. They shrieked, an awful static-laced shriek that spurred me faster. The corridor was still empty, so I sprinted for the nearest window, the radio clasped to my chest. My mind raced. The only way to kill it for sure is to smash it. But maybe I could also throw it out the building. That's insane, but behind me, footsteps approached. More voices moaned in unison. Panicked adrenaline surged. I found the floor's large glass window near the conference rooms. Without hesitation, I slammed the radio into the glass. Once, then twice, the plastic cracked but didn't break the window. Think Kevin. The glass was reinforced. I spotted the emergency hammer for fires. In a wild motion, I seized the hammer from its case, smashing it into the window. The pane spiderwebbed. Another blow, and it burst outward, letting in a rush of outside air. Alarms beeped at the broken window. The haze of the city skyline greeted me. Only I could see something bizarre. Pockets of random stillness, as if entire streets had paused. No time to linger. Felicia and James's footsteps were almost on me. I hurled the radio out. It tumbled through the shattered glass, swirling downward. A part of me expected an explosion or some monstrous cry. Instead, the device just spiraled into the air, soon vanishing from sight. The corridor behind me erupted with screeching. I turned to see half a dozen coworkers, gazes furious. They flinched, as though losing a direct connection to the radio's signal. Some clutched their heads while others stumbled. The overhead speaker crackled once more, then fell silent. For a fleeting moment, I thought it might all be over. Maybe we severed the link. My coworkers blinked, disoriented as though waking from a nightmare. I stepped back from the broken window, breath heaving. Felicia crumpled to her knees, staring at me with wide eyes. Kevin, what? She trembled. James sagged, confusion on his face. The building alarm beeped about a broken window. The threat might not be gone. After all, that was just one radio. The entity could be broadcasting from countless stations. But at least we ended its hold here. I exhaled, hoping I was right. The tension in the air receded, replaced by the stench of fear. In the distance, sirens wailed, echoing between skyscrapers. The city was in turmoil, that much was clear. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but a jolt of terror made me hesitant to answer. Is the caller also compromised? Suddenly, Felicia began sobbing, burying her face in her hands. James tried to comfort her, but he looked half-dazed himself. The overhead lights flickered. I had so many questions, but only one urgent priority. Get out, find my family, and figure out what was happening citywide. I guided Felicia and James toward the staircase, hoping to help them evacuate. They were shaky, but seemed free from the static's grip. For now, we had a window of safety. We descended the stairs. Some people mumbled about hearing voices or weird signals. Others had no recollection. The entire tower felt tainted with an uneasy hush. By the time we reached the lobby, the outside world was chaos. A swirl of emergency vehicles clogged the street. People milled around, phones pressed to their ears or lying broken on the pavement, uncertain expressions on their faces. I heard scraps of conversation. Radio told me to. Phones playing static. Something's happening all over. I needed to see my family, my wife Sarah and my boys. Were they safe at home, or had they turned on the car radio while driving? The notion twisted my gut. I parted ways with Felicia and James, who joined a cluster of coworkers near the entrance. They looked at me with gratitude, though they likely didn't fully grasp what I'd done. I forced a thin smile. Stay safe and please don't listen to any broadcast. If you see or hear static, get away. They nodded, fear shining in their eyes. I stepped outside. The day was bright, the sun overhead mocking the crisis unraveling beneath it. Sirens blared as a police cruiser careened by, lights flashing, but no officers hopped out. People on the sidewalk stood in clumps, some with vacant stares, others frantically discussing the voice on the airwaves. I checked my watch. It was nearly lunchtime, though it felt like a week had passed since morning. My phone buzzed again. This time I risked it, just a quick glance. The screen displayed a text from Sarah, writing, Kevin, are you okay? Something's going on with the radio news. It's all static. The neighbors are acting weird. Boys are inside with me. Please call me immediately. My heart soared. They were all right, or at least coherent. The text was normal, not the stilted monotone I'd feared. Relief mingled with anxiety. I have to get home, or at least confirm they're truly safe. But I also remembered the weird partial message. Don't listen to the radio. Did phones count? Possibly, but I had to take that risk. I dialed Sarah's number, holding my breath. She picked up after one ring. "Kevin," her voice shook. "It's me," I blurted, stepping around a cluster of passers-by. "I'm okay. Are you guys all right? Is the house safe?" Sarah exhaled, a tremor in her breath. "I think so. The radio in the kitchen started hissing an hour ago. I turned it off, but some neighbors seemed entranced. They wandered outside, just standing in their yards listening to something. The boys are so scared." A wave of gratitude rushed through me. She turned it off. "Good, we're dealing with the same here. People are going into a trance if they hear some kind of broadcast." She lowered her voice. "Kev," the local station announced an emergency alert, something about don't listen to the radio. Then it cut out. Then the static came back. "I'm so confused." "I know," I said. "Look, keep the boys away from any broadcast device. Don't let them watch TV or anything that might carry a radio wave." "I'm coming home now. Be careful," she urged. "The roads are a mess. People are panicking. Some are just standing in the middle of the street, glassy-eyed. A chill wind blew against me. "Yes, I will. I love you. Love you too," she whispered. I ended the call, heart pounding. So the phenomenon was citywide, maybe even beyond. An otherworldly entity. A mass hacking. Or a virus. My mind raced. The partial snippet I'd heard suggested something bigger, something about enslaving Earth. But how was that possible? One step at a time. I needed to get home, secure my family, then figure out how to fight back. Because burying my head in the sand wasn't an option. A new wave of determination coursed through me. I hurried to the parking lot behind the skyscraper, weaving around dazed individuals. Some murmured random nonsense, others looked near tears, pleading about the voices they heard. Police were nowhere to be seen, aside from the occasional shrieking siren far away. By the time I reached my car, a battered sedan, I was almost panting with tension. Sliding into the driver's seat, I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. No radio, I reminded myself, quickly jabbing the power button to ensure it stayed off. Then I pulled out, inching into the clogged street. Horns blared from confused drivers. I saw some vacant-eyed pedestrians wandering between cars, ignoring honks, forcing drivers to slam brakes. Tension crackled in the air. It took me half an hour just to leave downtown, the traffic a snarl of half-frozen vehicles. But every block further from the building, the radio static seemed less prevalent. My phone stayed silent. Finally, I hit the highway heading toward the suburbs. Normally, I'd turn on a local talk station. But now, that felt like stepping on a landmine. The silence in the car was oppressive. A question nagged me. Who or what was broadcasting that controlling static? And the voice that occasionally broke through seemed to be warning us to avoid it. Was that voice an ally trapped in the frequency, or something else entirely? I clenched the wheel. Soon I'd be home. Then I'd figure out the rest. Because if the city was truly under siege by a broadcast, the only chance was to gather loved ones, block out signals, and brace for the worst. Sarah greeted me at the door, eyes red, a baseball bat in her hands. She nearly collapsed into my arms, the bat clattering to the floor. Our boys, Theamage 10 and Liam 7, peeked around the corner with tear-streaked faces. I sank to my knees, pulling them into a fierce hug. The sweet smell of home warred with the dread in my stomach. "You're safe," I whispered, voice thick. "Thank God." Sarah locked the door behind me, triple-checking the deadbolt. Things are so crazy outside. The neighbors. I saw Mrs. Wilcox just stand in the street, gazing at the sky, like she was waiting for something. Then she shuffled away. The house was dim. I noticed Sarah had pulled curtains shut, stuffed towels against windows. The TV was unplugged, the radio missing from its usual spot. She must have taken the warning seriously. "Boys," I said, gently stroking their hair. "Have you heard any strange sounds, static, or voices?" Theo looked up, wide-eyed. The radio started making creepy noises. Mom turned it off. She said it was dangerous. I nodded, swallowing. "She's right. We're not turning anything on right now. No news, no normal broadcast. We'll figure this out ourselves." Sarah ushered the kids to the living room couch. Kevin, do you know what's happening? I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I'm not entirely sure. Something is hijacking radio frequencies, maybe more channels to control people. I saw my coworkers become, like zombies, protecting the source. I had to literally throw a radio out the window to break the effect. Sarah's eyes widened. That's truly horrifying. And there's more. I recounted the partial messages, emergency alert, don't listen to the radio, and vague references to an entity wanting to enslave Earth. Her face grew pale. The boys listened, fear etched in their expressions. I tried to keep it less graphic for their sake, but there was only so much sugarcoating possible. Finally, she pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. This sounds insane. But it's happening, isn't it? I nodded, grim. Yes, we need to stay off any broadcast. That includes phone calls, maybe. Though so far, texts seem safe. Theo piped up. So if the radio is controlling people, can't we just smash them all? Like you did at your office. I forced a wan smile. We might have to, but we can't do it alone. We need more info. Our TV signal's compromised too. Probably, and the entity might be using any audio broadcast, so we can't trust anything. That's why we're cutting ourselves off. A deep hush settled. Through the window, I glimpsed the afternoon sun starting its descent. Typically, I turn on the news about now, see the traffic or weather. But that was off limits. My chest tightened. We were blind in a sense. But at least we were alive. That's enough for now. Sarah grabbed my hand. What do we do next? I met her gaze. We fortify. We stay quiet, no TV or radio or streaming. We see if the neighbors are okay, maybe form a plan. Because if that thing is truly enslaving humanity, we either hide or fight back. She swallowed hard. Fight back how? Before I could respond, Liam tugged my sleeve. Dad, if we can't listen to anything, how do we get help? I gently ruffled his hair. We'll figure something out. First, we lock down the house, gather supplies, and pray this madness ends soon. But a nagging worry told me it wasn't going to end on its own. If that broadcast was truly otherworldly, we had to find a way to stop it at the source. Yet I had no idea how. For now, huddling with my family, we faced an uncertain night in a world where the radio was an enemy. That evening stretched into a slow torture of anxiety. We played board games by candlelight, trying to calm the boys. Every so often, we heard odd sounds from the street, distant screams or eerie hush, or that faint static hum creeping from some neighbor's open window. Each time we tensed, praying no one would come banging on our door. Around 9, I ushered Theo and Liam to bed, though they insisted on sleeping together in one room. Sarah and I took turns patrolling the house, triple-checking that no device was accidentally on. My mind replayed the half-heard transmissions. Enslave Earth, must destroy radio. If these were true, we faced something far beyond a normal crisis. The idea of an entity, an intelligence, lurking behind the broadcast made my skin crawl. I tried not to show fear in front of the kids, but inside, I was shaking. Around midnight, Sarah and I huddled in the living room on edge. She dozed off at times, head on my shoulder, but I stayed awake, ears straining for any sign of intrusion. At one point, I glimpsed a figure in our front yard, stumbling around. I nearly leapt up to confront them, but then realized they wore the same blank expression I'd seen downtown. They eventually wandered away, muttering nonsense. My heart hammered. If they tried to come inside, what would I do? Finally, exhaustion took hold and I drifted into a fitful half-sleep. Disturbing dreams plagued me, giant radio towers radiating black tendrils, pulling people like puppets. A voice whispered, "The rest of us are coming," over and over until I jolted awake in cold sweat. Sarah stirred, feeling startled. We checked the time, nearly 5 in the morning. With the faint light of early sunrise seeping through the curtains, we got up. The kids still slept, huddled under blankets. My shoulders ached, but I forced a breath, preparing for whatever day 2 of this madness would bring. We need a plan. Because simply hiding wouldn't solve the problem. Not if the entity's broadcast continued to spread. I ventured outside just after dawn, armed with a wooden bat, scanning the street. The world looked battered. Many neighbors' windows were shuttered. A few cars sat idling in driveways with no drivers in sight. The Smiths' radio lay smashed on their driveway, glass shards glinting. So others had realized the danger. Good. Up the road, I saw a man I recognized, Mr. Carpenter, clutching a transistor radio. He walked stiffly, eyes unfocused, that static hiss audible from across the lawn. My pulse quickened. If he was entranced, that meant the entity still had a foothold in the neighborhood. Should I confront him? Or should I slip away? He then turned as if noticing me. My grip on the bat tightened. But he merely blinked slowly, then resumed wandering down the street, hugging the radio to his chest. He's not violently attacking me, at least. For now, I let him be, not wanting to provoke a confrontation. In the living room, I found Sarah waiting anxiously. "We can't just wait for these creatures to arrive," she said. "Isn't there some way to jam the signals or destroy the source?" I paced. "We might attempt to find the main transmitter. Possibly the local radio station, or a central tower. But if this is happening everywhere, there might be multiple sources. Still, maybe that's the next step. Investigate the local station, Echo 92.4, it's downtown." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's risky. And how would we even do it? Could be overrun with enthralled staff." I shrugged helplessly. "I have no idea. But the alternative is sitting here, waiting for doomsday. We decided the kids would remain with her, barricaded at home. I'd drive back downtown, avoiding highways if possible." Anxiety roiled in my stomach, but I forced it down. A bizarre sense of calling told me I had to do this. Because if we didn't stop the broadcast, the rest would come, and everything would be lost. I set out mid-morning in my old sedan. The roads were a patchwork of chaos and eerie calm. Some blocks seemed normal, with folks on porches talking in hushed voices, shattered radios on driveways. Reaching the downtown area, I found it drastically changed from the day before. Broken glass glinted on sidewalks, store windows smashed. Some looters had apparently taken advantage. But that paled before the overall sense of dread. The streets had pockets of enthralled crowds, each huddled around a crackling device. The city's usual bustle was replaced by tension so thick, it was stifling. I parked a few blocks from the Echo radio station building, a modest tower overshadowed by taller offices. The station's large antenna soared overhead. Typically, I'd pass it without a second thought. Now, I stared with mounting anxiety. Could that antenna be broadcasting the enslaving signal? Clutching my wooden bat, my only real defense, and a backpack with some basic supplies, I crept closer. A policeman, or someone in uniform, lay unconscious near the station's front steps. My stomach twisted. The glass doors were propped open, faint static drifting out. I paused, heart pounding. If the entire building was broadcasting the malevolent signal, stepping inside could be suicidal. But I recalled the ephemeral voice. "You must destroy radio. Maybe shutting down the station would help." Summoning courage, I took a breath and pushed through the doors, bat ready. The lobby was empty but for a single motionless figure behind the reception desk, a woman in a rumpled blazer. She stared into space, lips trembling with half-formed words. The overhead speakers hissed. She turned glassy eyes on me but didn't move. My skin crawled. A sign pointed upstairs, studio/control room. That was likely where the broadcast originated. I inched around the desk, avoiding the woman's gaze. She watched me pass, but made no move to stop me. The static in the building was stronger, a resonant thrum that set my teeth on edge. Each step along the hallway to the stairwell felt like wading into quicksand. On the second floor, I found a door labeled "On Air." Through the small window, I glimpsed a radio studio. The usual panel of mixing boards and microphones. A single occupant, a gaunt man with headphones hunched over the console. The hiss emanated from the speakers on the walls. My heart hammered as I realized this must be the broadcast nerve center. But the man's posture was unnatural. His arms twitched, head occasionally jerked sideways. He wore an ID badge reading, Chris Markham, producer. Likely once a normal technician. Now, presumably hypnotized by the entity. I gripped the doorknob. Locked. I tested it gently. If I break this door, I'll draw attention. but the hallway was empty. Summoning nerve, I raised my bat and smashed the door handle. The noise reverberated. The occupant's head whipped around, eyes blazing with otherworldly intensity. Static crackled louder as if in alarm. Without hesitation, I kicked the door in. Splinters flew. The man at the console let out a guttural hiss, lurching to his feet. I brandished the bat. "Stay back," my voice shook. He advanced, mouth contorted as though about to speak. But instead of words, only a squealing note spilled out. My eardrums throbbed. He lunged. I swung the bat, connecting with his arm. He staggered, unresponsive to pain. The console beeped, red lights blinking. Possibly the broadcast was reacting to the confrontation. My mind raced. I need to disable the equipment. But the man was between me and the switchboard. He charged again, more aggressively. I had no choice but to swing. He took a blow to the shoulder, but his expression remained blank, fueled by unnatural strength. We grappled, nearly knocking over a mic stand. The hiss from the overhead speakers grew, as if the entity was enraged. Summoning adrenaline, I shoved him into the wall. He crashed into a rack of CDs, sending them scattering. Panting, I seized the opportunity, lunging for the main console. I saw the master broadcast slider, all the lights indicating a live feed. My hand slammed the power. The hiss abruptly stopped. For a moment, the man froze, blinking as though disoriented. Then he let out a strangled cry, collapsing to his knees. I stumbled back, chest heaving. The broadcast was off. Is that enough to end the citywide transmissions? Possibly not, but at least we'd severed this station's feed. Catching my breath, I studied the man. He sobbed softly, confusion in his eyes. Maybe he was freed from the entity. Something in me felt pity. Another victim. Then my gaze drifted to the control board. A small, tacked-up note read, "Signal override authorized by." The name was smudged. But it might be a clue. My stomach churned. Signal override. I rummaged around, finding a scratched-up flash drive in the console's USB port. Possibly the entity's infiltration method. My trembling fingers removed it. The man huddled, moaning about the voice. I pocketed the drive, feeling it might hold answers. Then a new sound made my blood freeze. A faint crackle from a backup speaker behind me. Even though I'd cut the main feed, some device was still active. The static rose again, whispering. The man's eyes flicked upward, renewed emptiness creeping in. "No," I gasped. I yanked cables, smashing them with the bat. The speaker sputtered and died. The man slumped once more. "Can't stay," I muttered. This place was a hornet's nest. Yet I'd done what I could. With the main console destroyed, the Echo radio station's big antenna might be offline. Perhaps that was enough. But a fear gnawed. What if the entity has other stations? I fled the studio, bounding down the stairs, ignoring the dazed receptionist. Outside, the morning sun was bright on the street, but the city's gloom remained. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Kevin, hurry home. Something's off. A man's knocking at doors, carrying a portable radio. We're hiding inside." My blood ran cold. The broadcast might be traveling by portable units now that the bigger signals were disrupted. I dashed to my car, hopped in and gunned the engine. If someone was going door to door with a radio, they might forcibly enslave my family next. No way in hell. I raced through the city's battered streets, weaving around abandoned cars and clusters of zombies. A few times, I glimpsed tension between those free and those enslaved, shouting or scuffling. The whole place was unraveling. "Focus, Kevin. Get to your family." The memory of Sarah's text hammered in my skull. Finally, I reached our subdivision. On my block, some houses had broken windows or scrawled warnings like "No radio allowed" across doors. Others were eerily silent. Parking the car outside my house, I leapt out, brandishing my bat. No sign of the radio-carrying man on the lawn. Good, but was he lurking? Creeping up the walkway, I noticed the door slightly ajar. My heart almost stopped. Did Sarah forget to lock it, or was it forced open? I gently pushed it open. Inside, hush. "Sarah." "Boys," I called softly. At first, no answer. My heart hammered. Then came a muffled sound from the living room. I rushed in to find the kids crouched behind the couch, wide-eyed. Sarah stood guard with the baseball bat, relief washing over her face when she saw me. She nearly collapsed into my arms. He forced the door, tried to come in, she whispered shakily. We pushed him out. Then he left, or maybe he's still around the corner. I exhaled a shaky breath. Thank God you're okay. Glancing around, I saw no new damage. Good. I managed to shut down one station, but there could be more. The city's a mess, she nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Theo and Liam are terrified. They keep asking if we'll ever watch cartoons again. A sad half-laugh escaped her lips. Then she stiffened, eyes falling on my bat. Did you learn anything? The broadcast, is it definitely from something not human? I swallowed, I believe so. The partial phrases, the sense of a presence behind the static. I found a flash drive at the station's console, some override code. Might hold clues, her brow furrowed. Should we look at it? That might be risky. I shrugged, maybe on an offline computer, no audio. If we see text logs or something that explains how it hijacks signals, we can figure out how to fight back. The kids listened anxiously, so I softened my tone. It might help us stop this. So we never have to worry about weird radio static again. They nodded, trusting me. A pang of responsibility weighed on my shoulders. I have to see this through. We retreated to my old laptop in the den, which had no speakers. I'd removed them long ago when they died, relying only on headphones. A stroke of luck, less chance for any infiltration. Carefully, I inserted the flash drive. The folder contained cryptic files labeled with codes. One was a text doc, another a series of odd script logs. Skimming them, I saw references to Phase 1, Soften, Phase 2, Entrain, Phase 3, Arrival. My blood chilled. Phase 1 apparently was about subtly injecting messages into daily radio broadcasts, priming listeners. Soften them for acceptance. The text claimed that once enough minds were receptive, Phase 2 would forcibly enslave entire populations. The final line read, Phase 3, open gateway for the rest of them. The remaining text was corrupted. Sarah read over my shoulder, jaw dropping. It's an invasion plan. A deep dread settled in my bones. The logs indicated the entity, code-named, the Whisperer, was placed on Earth as an advanced infiltration tool. The radio signals carried a psychoacoustic pattern that latched onto human neural pathways. The plan was to hypnotize or enslave humanity so the rest could arrive unopposed. My mind spun, so it's not a single station. This infiltration is global, or at least widespread. We shut down one station, but countless others remain. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. How do we possibly stop that? I clenched my fists. We can't do it alone. But maybe if we replicate the sabotage for other stations or jam the frequencies altogether, or if we find the entity itself, physically, we can end it. She shuddered at him. The logs say it's physically manifested somewhere, controlling transmissions. Possibly moving from station to station. That's really horrifying. We stared at the screen in disbelief. My kids huddled near the door, picking up bits of our conversation. I turned to them gently. Listen, everything will be okay. Mom and I have a plan. We'll stay safe. They nodded, though fear lingered in their eyes. I have to keep them safe, no matter what. But the next question, where is the entity now? We spent the rest of that day quietly. The kids played with old toys, no electronics. Sarah and I tried to glean more from the flash drive. Its logs ended abruptly, referencing a trusted partner in the city. Could that be someone at my workplace? I recalled my colleague, Daniel, who worked on specialized software. He'd once boasted about a side gig with local radio stations. A chill pricked my skin. Could Daniel be compromised? Or even an accomplice to the entity? That evening, I decided to check on him. Daniel was the colleague I was closest to, ironically. He once gave me a ride when my car broke down. We occasionally grabbed beers. If he was part of this infiltration, or if he'd found clues, I needed to know. Despite Sarah's protests about my leaving again, I insisted. Daniel's apartment was only a 10-minute drive. I'll be quick, I said, kissing her forehead. We have to confirm if he's involved. Night fell as I pulled up to his complex. The power was out on his street, apparently. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I approached his building's entrance. This is insane. Why can't I just let it be? But a compulsion drove me forward. The logs mentioned a partner, and Daniel's knowledge of radio systems was too coincidental. His apartment door was slightly ajar. My heart thudded as I knocked softly. But there was no response. Pushing it open, I stepped into darkness. The faint odor of stale coffee and unwashed laundry hung in the air. "Daniel," I called. A voice answered from the living room. "Kevin, come in." I edged forward. The living room was lit by a single candle. Daniel sat on a couch, arms resting on his knees. He looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between relief and tension. "Hey," I said uncertainly. "I was worried about you." "The city's in chaos." He gave a tight nod. "Yeah, chaos, the broadcasts." "You know about them?" I quickly exhaled. "Yes, I shut down the Echo radio station earlier. The entity controlling people. I found logs referencing a partner." "Daniel, please tell me it's not you." He stared at me for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not the partner, Kev. But I know who is. We were approached months ago to help route special signals into our software. I refused, but my boss or someone took the deal. The pay was insane. I tried to warn them it was shady. Then the static began." He shuddered. Relief washed over me. "Thank God. So you're not enthralled?" He shook his head, eyes haunted. "Not yet. I heard some partial transmissions, fought them off with earplugs. But something's off. Kev, you have no idea. There's an actual creature behind the broadcast. I saw a glimpse of it once, in the station's basement. It's like a living swirl of static or a monstrous shape. I can't even describe." My gut twisted. "A basement? At which station?" He frowned, confused. "I can't remember. Everything's jumbled. Maybe not Echo. Another place." He rubbed his temples. "I keep blacking out. I suspect it's been calling me at random times, trying to override my mind." My sympathy flared. "We have to do something. If we can find the entity, we can stop the rest from coming. I have a flash drive with logs. It references Phase 3, arrival. That's presumably an invasion." Daniel nodded. "So you're forging a plan to kill it. That's the idea. Or sabotage it somehow." I paused. "Are you with me?" He licked his lips, casting an odd glance around. "Yes, definitely. I'm with you." His voice sounded a bit too careful. A flicker of suspicion stirred in me, but I dismissed it. He was probably just traumatized. We arranged to meet the next morning, gather supplies. He said he knew a location rumored to house the core of the entity's operation. I left with a sense of hope. My friend was alive, not enthralled, and we had a lead. If all went well, we'd end this nightmare soon. Back home, I told Sarah about Daniel's intel. She was wary. "Are you sure you can trust him?" I hesitated. He seemed normal enough. "Just stress, but yes, I trust him. He's never given me reason to doubt him before." The flicker of doubt lingered, though. Something about his eyes or demeanor was off. Still, we pressed forward. The next morning, Daniel arrived at our house, a battered duffel bag over his shoulder. He greeted Sarah politely, his gaze flicking around the living room. The kids watched from the hall, uneasy. Daniel gave them a strained smile. He explained that the rumored location was a shuttered broadcast facility outside the city, used for emergency signals during storms. Possibly the entity nested there. We'd drive out, see if we could confront or destroy the monstrous presence. The plan felt half-baked, but better than nothing. We piled into my sedan, leaving Sarah and the boys behind. She clutched my hand at the door. "Come back safe," she whispered, eyes brimming with worry. I kissed her, promising I would. Then Daniel and I set off. We navigated side roads. The broadcast infiltration had only worsened. We passed entire neighborhoods where zombified people milled about, muttering or swaying. Occasionally, we glimpsed normal folks forming small defense groups. Gunshots echoed in the distance. The world teetered on the brink of collapse. Daniel guided me along seldom-used lanes. I tried making small talk, but he was reserved, often responding in monotone. I chalked it up to fear. Meanwhile, we approached the outskirts, a place known for old radio towers. My pulse quickened. Are we nearing the source? Eventually, we arrived at a chain-link fence around an abandoned facility. The sign read Emergency Broadcast Relay, number 12. We parked behind a cluster of trees. Daniel donned earplugs, which he said were to block potential transmissions. I followed suit with my own. We cut the fence, stepping into the overgrown yard. A large tower loomed overhead, a silent sentinel. Inside, the building was dim, smells of mildew and dust. We found a corridor with labeled doors, control room, generator room, etc. My heart hammered. If the entity was here, we'd see signs of static or zombified guards. Daniel led, stepping with surprising confidence for someone who'd never visited. It was a bit odd, but I trailed behind, bat in hand. The corridor ended at a locked door. He produced a small key set. "Picked this up from a friend," he muttered, kneeling. That friend, presumably, was the partner. My suspicion flared, but I said nothing as he unlocked the door. We entered a large chamber filled with defunct broadcast equipment. Stacks of archaic radio consoles, dusty racks of servers. Daniel scanned the room. "Help me search," he said. "If the entity's here, we might find, I dunno, a nest or a hidden vault." I nodded, rummaging. My earplugs dampened sound, but I could still faintly hear Daniel's footsteps. After a few minutes, I glanced up. He was across the room, rummaging through a supply cabinet. Then slowly he turned. The expression on his face twisted my stomach. A cold blankness replaced the earlier tension, as though he'd dropped a mask. "Kevin," he said, voice disturbingly calm. "You shouldn't have come here." A chill slithered down my spine. "What do you mean?" "You brought me." He let out a soft laugh that contained no mirth. "Yes, of course, because the entity wanted you here." My throat went dry. "Oh God, Daniel, you're compromised." He shrugged, grin unnatural. "I've been for days, trying to lure you or gather intel. You've made it quite difficult, interfering with the broadcast. Now, I must ensure you don't sabotage further." Terror spiked. I gripped the bat. "Stay back," he chuckled, stepping closer. "We're so close to the new dawn, Kevin. Once the rest arrive, you'll realize how pointless your resistance is. Why not surrender? Join us instead. The entity can grant you the tranquility so many crave." I remembered Felicia's vacant eyes, the lifeless calm. "I'd rather die." Daniel's face darkened. "That can be arranged," he lunged. The earplugs didn't save me from the sickening crunch as he tried to wrest the bat from my hands. He was freakishly strong, no longer the gentle software guy. We tumbled across dusty cables. I managed to elbow him off. He hissed, static undertones coloring his voice. Then he came at me again. We traded blows. He was relentless, apparently feeling no pain. I swung the bat, catching his ribs. He stumbled but instantly recovered, eyes glinting with malevolent purpose. He pinned me against the wall, hands at my throat. My vision blurred. I groped for anything, found a metal rod and slammed it into his temple. He staggered, loosening his grip. Gasping for air, I shoved him away. "I can't kill him. He was once my friend." But he hissed again, a wild fervor in his gaze, like a cornered beast. He lunged for me one last time. My instincts took over. I swung the bat with full force. It cracked against his skull. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Panting, tears stinging my eyes, I stared at his limp form. My friend, now a puppet of the entity, forced me to do this. A wave of grief and fury swept me. Curse this monstrous broadcast. I had to end it. A quick check showed Daniel was still breathing. I rummaged around, found rope and bound him. Then I had to go. No entity nest here. This must have been a trap. Stumbling back to my car, I left him bound in that building, hoping he might recover if the broadcast ended. My emotions ran rampant, betrayal, sorrow, fury. The infiltration was deeper than I imagined. What if others I trust are compromised? I drove away, tears burning in my eyes, heading home with a battered spirit. The entity had tried to kill me through Daniel. No more illusions, this was war. Back home, I broke the news to Sarah. Daniel was compromised, tried to murder me. She was horrified. The kids overheard, looking shaken. I reassured them I was fine physically, but mentally, I felt cracked. I nearly killed my friend. The entity had no mercy, turning us against each other. Amid the gloom, a ring at our door startled us. I grabbed the bat, exchanging a glance with Sarah. She nodded, ushering the boys into another room. Carefully, I opened the door a crack. To my shock, it was Felicia, my coworker from day one, the one I'd saved by throwing the radio out the window. She looked exhausted but free of static influence. She carried a large envelope. "Kevin," she said, voice quivering, "I need your help." My guard remained up, but her eyes were genuinely desperate. "Felicia, are you safe from the broadcast?" She nodded. "Yes, after you destroyed that radio, I remembered everything. But it's everywhere, my neighbors, the news. I left the city because I found documents that might help." She held up the envelope. "They mention an actual location where the entity is physically manifested." My heart pounded. Could this be the lead we needed? "Come in," I said. She entered, tension radiating from her. We sat around the dining table, Sarah joining. Felicia spread out photocopies, old city records, a scribbled note referencing an abandoned Saturn Ridge power station in the hills. I found these on my boss's desk. They linked transmissions to that area. Something about a hidden lab or a conduit, a flicker of hope. "So that's where the entity is anchored," she shrugged. "Possibly. The notes are cryptic, referencing non-human occupant and radio wave synergy, but it's our best guess." Sarah frowned, voice tight. "This is so risky, but if we can locate the entity physically, we might destroy it for good." Felicia nodded. "Exactly. I can't do this alone. But you saved me. So I'm trusting you. Are we going to Saturn Ridge?" I weighed the risk. The city was devolving, the broadcast enslaved more daily. If we do nothing, we face unstoppable infiltration. "We go," I said firmly. "We find it and we end it." Sarah and Felicia's eyes were grimly determined. We agreed the kids would remain behind under a neighbor's watch, away from any potential infiltration. We spent the next hours gathering supplies: earplugs, flashlights, weapons, extra rope. My mind reeled that we were planning an all-out confrontation with an alien presence. That afternoon, we set off in 2 vehicles, me, Sarah, and Felicia in one, while the kids stayed with trustworthy neighbors, well-armed and forewarned about ignoring any broadcast. Theo tried not to cry. Liam clung to me, begging me not to go. I promised we'd return. Saturn Ridge was an hour outside the city, a remote area known for its old, decommissioned power station. The drive felt surreal. We passed countryside dotted with farmland. Some fields had rows of blank-eyed farmhands, presumably enthralled. Others were empty. The local radio towers we glimpsed made me shudder. Felicia navigated from the notes. She'd highlighted references to a secret sublevel. "We might find an entire radio lab hidden beneath the power station," she said, voice taut. The entity's main nest. Finally, we reached a rusted gate marked Saturn Ridge Power closed. We parked behind some brush. The wind whipped, thunder rumbling. We approached on foot, earplugs at the ready, scanning for signs of enthralled watchers. The facility loomed ahead, a cluster of metal buildings, one large tower, and a scattering of utility lines. Perfect spot for covert transmissions. We snuck around the perimeter, forced open a side door. Inside, gloom reigned. Broken catwalks, dusty control panels. The wind howled through cracked windows. My heart hammered. This is it. If the entity was here, it must be below. We found a stairwell that led down. A faint hum tickled our ears, even through earplugs, like an electrical drone but layered with that dreaded static. We pressed on, flashlights revealing a corridor lined with pipes. Each step took us deeper into claustrophobic darkness. Finally, we reached a locked steel door. Felicia motioned to it. We heard a muffled hiss from inside. Could it be the entity? Summoning nerve, we forced the lock with crowbars. The door groaned open. A wave of stale air and crackling static washed over us. Inside was a large chamber lit by flickering emergency lights. Machinery dotted the space, cables snaking along the floor. And in the center, oh God. My pulse lurched at the sight. A swirling, amorphous mass, part shadow, part shimmering static, hovered near a large radio apparatus. The air around it vibrated with malevolent energy. I felt an immense presence pressing on my mind, despite the earplugs. Felicia gasped. Sarah gripped my arm. The swirling shape roiled, tentacles of intangible darkness flickering in and out. Then a whispering voice flooded our heads. You come to destroy me, but you are too late. The rest approach. This broadcast is unstoppable. Join us or perish. My knees nearly buckled from the psychic weight. My earplugs did little to block this direct mental speech. We advanced, searching for a control console or something to sabotage. The entity's swirling form pulsed, arcs of energy crackling. The radio apparatus next to it glowed with an unearthly aura, possibly the main transmitter for the region. Lightning flashed through a high window, thunder shaking the structure. We readied the crowbars, uncertain how to fight intangible static. But the console might be vulnerable. Felicia sprinted forward, brandishing her tool. The entity shrieked, a piercing mental assault. Pain lanced my skull. I nearly collapsed. Sarah and I followed, trying to pry cables from the console. Sparks flew. The entity howled, tentacles thrashing. An unholy stench filled the air. My vision blurred, but I tore at wires, recalling how I'd smashed the radio at work. If we sever this transmitter, maybe the entity's hold breaks. Finally, with a mighty yank, Felicia dislodged a key power cable. The apparatus sputtered. The swirling mass screeched, fluxing wildly. Another cable tore free. The lights flickered. A wave of energy burst from the entity, sending us sprawling. But the console died, its lights dark. The static hush receded. The entity's shape flickered, weakened. Anguish or rage poured from it in waves. I forced myself upright, battered but resolute. Now, I shouted, raising a crowbar. We hammered the remaining hardware, smashing tubes and boards. The entity let out a final, ear-splitting wail. Then, in a swirl of luminous smoke, it collapsed in on itself. The room fell silent. I gasped, adrenaline roaring in my veins. Did we kill it? Sarah sank to her knees, tears streaming. Felicia huddled, staring at the spot. Where the entity had been, only faint motes of black dust remained. My mind reeled. Could it be that simple? Exiting the power station felt surreal. Rain began to pour, washing away the dust. We climbed back to ground level. The facility was eerily quiet. No zombified guards, no alarms. Once outside, we realized the overhead thunder had quieted, the storm receding. A sense of profound relief descended. We might have done it. Possibly the broadcast would fade citywide, freeing everyone. We drove home in a daze. Along the roads, we saw enthralled folk blinking awake, confused. Some sank to the ground, sobbing. Others shouted in joy. A policeman we passed confirmed that radios had lost their static, returning to normal dead air. The city soared with the first hints of freedom. My heart soared too. We ended it. The entity was destroyed, no transmissions left to enthrall. At home, I reunited with the boys in a tearful embrace. They said some neighbors had abruptly snapped out of their trances. Laughter, tears, confusion all swirled in the block. For the first time in days, it felt like dawn after a long nightmare. We feasted on a simple dinner, calmer than we dared hope. Felicia joined us, smiling through exhaustion. That night, we collapsed into bed, relief washing over us. Yet, as dawn broke the next day, a persistent unease nagged me. The entity was gone. Why did my skin still prickle? Outside, the city was messy, but the enthrallment had ended. People began cleaning up. The roads reopened. Some radio stations resumed normal broadcasts, albeit cautiously. A battered newscaster on TV apologized for misinformation, disclaiming any knowledge of the weird static. Everyone tried to return to normal. But normal was changed forever. And as we discovered, we might have jumped to a false conclusion about our final victory. It started with a subtle shift in the morning light. I was in the backyard, letting the sun warm my face, sipping coffee. Then, for no reason, the color of the sky seemed to fade. A hush fell over everything, no birds and no breeze. My skin tingled as though electricity danced across it. Sarah stepped out, concern on her face. "The air feels weird," she murmured. Yes, that same static hush, but now emanating from the sky itself, or from nowhere. My phone beeped with an emergency alert. Emergency alert. Mass anomalies detected in upper atmosphere. Do not look at the sky. My blood ran cold. This mirrored the old command about not listening to the radio. Now it was, don't look at the sky. Another wave of infiltration. We rushed inside, hearts pounding. The kids huddled near the window, wide-eyed. "Dad, the sky is turning gray," Liam whispered. Indeed, the bright morning had darkened into a swirling mass of cloud-like shapes, but not real clouds. More like roiling static overhead. The ground trembled. Felicia, rummaging in the living room, gasped. "You feel that?" "Yes," vibrations in the walls. The city outside erupted in new panic. We heard distant screams. Then, from every device that was turned off or on, a new voice poured forth, richer, deeper, triumphant. "Phase 2 is complete. Phase 3 commences." "The rest have arrived," my heart lurched. We'd only destroyed the local transmitter entity. But the rest were here, overshadowing Earth from the atmosphere. We never truly stopped them, only delayed them. They came from above, not the radio anymore. The final invasion. The entire planet might now be overshadowed by these creatures. Or maybe we faced an even worse fate. Our final glimpse, the swirling overhead parted, revealing monstrous shapes drifting in the sky, silhouettes bigger than skyscrapers, made of living static and shadow. A single thunderous voice boomed, "Now you shall see the truth of our dominion." The house shook. We huddled together, hearts pounding. This is the real endgame. The story we thought concluded had only begun. The entity's broadcast was merely the prelude. And as the monstrous forms descended, everything we'd done seemed heartbreakingly small. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.